My name is Gage, and at 62 years old, I thought I knew what to expect from life. This Christmas was special. My first invitation to my son Thomas's home since Martha passed 5 years ago. I spent weeks preparing, hoping to reconnect with my 3 children and 5 grandchildren. When I arrived at that grand house, everything seemed perfect. But during dinner, Thomas stood up, looked me straight in the eye, and said those words I never expected. "You're no longer family. We voted." If you're watching this, let me know where you're from and hit that like and subscribe button. The story I'm about to share might just change how you think about family forever. I spent 40 years as a construction worker. 40 years of early mornings, calloused hands, and aching backs. But I never complained because every nail hammered and every wall raised was for my family. Martha and I had a beautiful 35-year marriage until cancer took her from me 5 years ago. We were high school sweethearts who built a life from scratch. Together we raised 3 children who became the center of our universe. Thomas, my oldest at 40, always had that determined look in his eyes. Even as a little boy, he calculated every move, planned every step. He grew up to become a successful bank manager, living in that big house in the suburbs with his wife Sophia and their 2 children, Jacob and Emma. Thomas was always cold, always precise, just like the numbers he worked with all day. James followed in his brother's footsteps. At 37, he became a corporate lawyer, the kind that defends big companies against small people. He married Patricia, a marketing executive, and they have twins, Sarah and Samuel. James was never really his own person, always trying to impress Thomas, always seeking approval from his older brother, rather than forging his own path. Then there's Amanda, my youngest, at 35. She became an elementary school teacher, the only one who occasionally called to check on me after Martha died. She married David, a good man who works as an architect, and they have 1 daughter, Lily. Amanda was always the sensitive one, the peacemaker, the one who felt things deeply, but often stayed quiet to keep the peace. Martha and I sacrificed everything for those kids. We worked extra shifts to save for their college funds. We skipped vacations so they could go to summer camps. I remember one particularly hard winter when the construction jobs dried up, and I took night shifts at the local factory just to make sure Thomas could stay in that private school he loved. Martha waitressed on weekends, even though she was exhausted from her regular nursing job. We lived modestly in our small 3-bedroom house, the one I still call home. It is not fancy, but Martha made it special with her little touches. The handmade curtains, the vegetable garden out back the wall, where we marked the kids' heights as they grew. We never had luxury cars or fancy vacations, but our children never went without the things they truly needed. When they all left for college, one by one, Martha and I were so proud. We had done it. Raised 3 successful children who would have opportunities we never had. We thought we had built a foundation of love and respect that would last forever. But when Martha got sick, things began to change. The kids visited less and less. Thomas was always too busy at work. James had important cases. Only Amanda made regular appearances at the hospital, though even she seemed uncomfortable with the reality of her mother's illness. After Martha passed, the distance grew even wider. The phone calls became less frequent, the visits rare special occasions rather than regular parts of life. Last Christmas, I sat alone in our house looking at old photographs and wondering where I had gone wrong. I sent gifts to all the grandchildren, but only received a brief text message from Thomas. "Got the packages. Kids say thanks." Now I spend my days in that too-quiet house living on a modest pension that covers the bills but not much else. I volunteer at the local homeless shelter twice a week, something Martha always wanted us to do together when we retired. I find purpose there helping people who have hit rock bottom find their footing again. Some days I wonder if my own family would notice if I disappeared. The house feels emptier with each passing year. I keep Martha's things just as she left them. Her reading glasses still on the nightstand, her favorite coffee mug still in the cabinet. Sometimes I talk to her asking for advice she can no longer give. Where did we go wrong, Martha? Did we love them too much or not enough? Did we give them too little or too much? Retirement was supposed to be our golden years. We had planned to travel a bit, see the Grand Canyon, visit the ocean. Martha never got to do any of that. And now I find myself too tired and too alone to do it by myself. The dreams we shared feel like they belonged to someone else entirely. The phone call from Thomas came on December 1st. I was so surprised to hear his voice that at first I thought something was wrong. "Dad," he said, his voice formal as always. "Sophia and I would like to invite you to Christmas dinner this year." My heart leapt in my chest. After years of distance, could this be the beginning of a reconciliation? I tried to keep my voice steady, not wanting him to hear the desperate hope I felt. "I would love that, son. What can I bring?" "Just yourself," Thomas replied. "Dinner will be at 6. We have some family matters to discuss." Family matters. Those words echoed in my mind for days afterward. Perhaps they wanted to mend the relationships that had frayed since Martha's death. Maybe Thomas had realized life was too short for estrangement. Whatever the reason, I was being invited back into the fold, and I was determined not to waste the opportunity. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing for this reunion. I shopped carefully for gifts, wanting each one to be meaningful. For Jacob Thomas's 14-year-old son, I found a vintage baseball card from the player he had mentioned admiring the last time I saw him nearly 2 years ago. For 10-year-old Emma, I bought a beautiful journal, remembering how she always loved to write stories. For James's twins, I found science kits. Sarah had always been fascinated by experiments, and Samuel loved anything to do with robots. For Amanda's daughter Lily, I selected a collection of books from the series Martha used to read to Amanda when she was little. But the most important gift was for Thomas. In my attic, carefully wrapped in soft cloth, was my grandfather's pocket watch. It was the only thing of value I had inherited. A beautiful gold timepiece that had been passed down through generations. I had been saving it for the right moment, and this Christmas seemed perfect. I polished it until it gleamed, replaced its worn leather case with a new one, and wrapped it carefully. I also spent days preparing Martha's special dessert, a cranberry bread pudding that had been her signature holiday dish. I followed her handwritten recipe card, exactly measuring each ingredient with precision, remembering how she used to hum Christmas carols while she baked. It took 3 attempts before I got it right, the kitchen filling, with the familiar scent of cinnamon and vanilla that brought tears to my eyes. As the days passed, I found myself filled with nervous energy. I cleaned my small house from top to bottom, even though no one would see it. I practiced what I would say to each family member, rehearsing little comments and questions that would show I had been thinking about them. I wanted everything to be perfect. The night before Christmas Eve, I could barely sleep. I kept thinking about how it would feel to be surrounded by family again, to hear the laughter of my grandchildren, to be part of something bigger than my solitary existence. I imagined reconciliation, forgiveness, new beginnings. On Christmas Day, I woke before dawn. I showered and put on my best clothes, the navy suit I had worn to Martha's funeral, now hanging a bit loose on my frame. I packed the car carefully, with all the gifts and the bread pudding, checking 3 times to make sure I had forgotten nothing. The drive to Thomas's suburb took nearly 2 hours. His neighborhood was exactly what you would expect. Large houses set back from perfect streets, expensive cars in circular driveways, professionally decorated Christmas lights twinkling from every roofline. His house was among the largest, a sprawling two-story colonial with white columns and a three-car garage. As I pulled into the driveway behind a row of luxury vehicles, I felt a moment of self-consciousness about my 15-year-old sedan. I checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror, straightened my tie, and reminded myself that I was here as a father and grandfather, not to impress anyone with material things. I gathered the gifts and the dessert and made my way to the front door. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open to reveal Sophia Thomas's wife. She was dressed immaculately, as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing an expensive-looking red dress and heels that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Gage," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You made it. Come in before you let all the heat out." As I stepped into the grand foyer with its soaring ceiling and marble floor, I felt like I had entered another world, one where I did not quite belong. But I was determined to bridge whatever gaps had formed between us. This was family after all. This was what mattered most. The tension was palpable as I entered Thomas's home. The grand foyer opened into a living room, where a massive Christmas tree stood adorned with matching gold and silver ornaments. Nothing like the mismatched collection of homemade decorations that had graced our family tree for decades. Everything in the house seemed to come from a designer catalog rather than a lived life. "Dad's here," Sophia announced, her voice carrying through the house with the practiced projection of someone used to being heard. Thomas emerged from what appeared to be his home office smartphone still in hand. He nodded at me without smiling. "Dad, glad you could make it." His handshake was firm but brief, a business greeting, rather than a familial embrace. James and his wife Patricia were next to appear, both with the same polite but distant expressions. James clapped me awkwardly on the shoulder. "How is retirement treating you?" Before I could answer, Amanda came in with her husband David. She at least offered a genuine smile and a hug, though it felt hurried. "Dad, it is good to see you," she whispered. I looked around eagerly for my grandchildren, but saw no sign of them. "The kids are in the basement playroom," Thomas explained, noticing my searching gaze. "They will be up for dinner." I set my offerings on the designated table, already piled high with professionally wrapped presents, and followed everyone into the formal living room. The conversation was strained from the start. Every question I asked about their lives was answered with minimal details before the subject was changed. "How is the bank these days, Thomas?" I asked. "Fine. Busy as always." "James, did you tell Dad about your new position?" James cleared his throat. "I made partner this year." "That is wonderful," I exclaimed. "Your mother would have been so proud." A strange look passed between the brothers at the mention of Martha. "Can I help with anything in the kitchen?" I asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence that followed. "Everything is under control," Sophia replied. "We have caterers for the main meal. Your contribution can go with the other desserts." I noticed the slight hesitation before the word contribution, as if my homemade pudding was somehow less worthy than whatever else they had planned. When the grandchildren finally came upstairs, I barely recognized them. Jacob, who had been a young boy last time I saw him, was now a teenager with his father's serious expression. Emma had grown at least 6 inches. James's twins stared at me with blank expressions when I greeted them, clearly having no memory of their grandfather. Only Lily, Amanda's daughter, approached me with curiosity. "Are you really my grandpa? Mom has your picture in our house." "I am indeed," I replied, heartwarming at this small connection. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a spectacular spread that looked like it belonged in a magazine. As we sat around the large table, I tried again to engage with my family. Remember those Christmas mornings when you kids would wake us up at 5 a.m.? I began. Thomas, you always organized your siblings to sneak down the stairs together. Dad, Thomas interrupted. That was a very long time ago. Speaking of old things, Sophia interjected, have you thought about selling that house? It must be so difficult to maintain at your age. It is not so bad, I replied. I keep busy with projects. It seems impractical, Sophia continued. All that unused space for just one person. And the neighborhood has really gone downhill, has it not? I have good neighbors. I defended, feeling a strange need to justify my modest home. The Rodriguez family next door always checks on me, and Mrs. Wilson across the street shares her garden vegetables. Thomas winced visibly at these names. You really should consider a retirement community, something with people your own age, with activities and healthcare facilities. James nodded in agreement. It makes financial sense, too. You could invest the proceeds from the house sale. I looked to Amanda for support, but she was focused intently on cutting her child's food, avoiding my gaze. Throughout the meal, I noticed more strange glances between my children. Each time I mentioned a memory or brought up Martha, the atmosphere grew thicker with unspoken tension. The grandchildren remained largely silent, occasionally whispering to each other or looking at their phones under the table. When I offered to help clear the dishes, Thomas insisted I remain seated. We have something to discuss, he said, his voice taking on the tone he probably used in board meetings. As the caterers cleared the main course and the grandchildren were sent back to the basement, I felt a growing sense of unease. Whatever family matters Thomas had mentioned on the phone, I was beginning to suspect they were not what I had hoped for. The Christmas reunion I had dreamed of was feeling more and more like a carefully orchestrated intervention, though for what purpose I could not yet guess. As the last plate was cleared away, Thomas stood up at the head of the table. He straightened his already perfectly straight tie and cleared his throat. The room fell silent, and I felt the weight of multiple pairs of eyes on me. Dad, Thomas began, his voice measured and formal. We have asked you here today, not just for Christmas dinner, but because we needed to have an important family discussion. My heart lifted slightly. Perhaps this was about a family vacation they wanted to include me in, or maybe even plans to visit more often. The fact is, Thomas continued, we have been talking as a family about our future directions and relationships. He paused, looking to James and then to Amanda, who both gave slight nods. What I need to tell you is that we have taken a vote, and we have decided that it would be best if you were no longer considered an active part of this family. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at Thomas, certain I had misheard. I do not understand, I managed to say, my voice barely audible. Thomas sighed as if explaining something to a slow child. Dad, your views and lifestyle are simply not compatible with the lives we have built for ourselves and our children. You are stuck in the past with outdated ideas and embarrassing habits. Embarrassing, I echoed, still struggling to process what was happening. James jumped in, his lawyer voice taking over. Dad, last year at Jacob's birthday, you showed up in that old truck with rust on the fenders. You brought a handmade gift when everyone else had purchased items from the registry. Thomas's colleagues were there, bank executives and their families. And remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago, Sophia added. You kept talking about your volunteer work with the homeless right in front of our dinner guests from the country club. It was so inappropriate. I do not see how helping others is inappropriate, I said, feeling defensive now. Thomas shook his head. It is not what you do, Dad. It is how you present yourself. You do not understand the social circles we move in now. Everything reflects on us, including you. And frankly, James continued, Your refusal to upgrade your technology makes you impossible to include in family communications. Everyone uses the family group chat except you. I offered to learn, I said quietly. Amanda was going to teach me about smartphones. All eyes turned to Amanda, who flushed red and stared down at the tablecloth. The point is, Thomas pressed on, we have built lives that are moving forward while you insist on living in the past. You still keep Mom's clothes in the closet, for God's sake. You talk about her as if she is still here. It has been 5 years, Dad. 5 years. I felt tears threatening but forced them back. She was my wife for 35 years. Your mother. And now she is gone, Thomas said coldly. Life moves on. We have moved on. The dining room felt suddenly airless. I looked at each of my children in turn. Thomas stood rigid and resolute. James sat with the practiced, neutral expression of a lawyer delivering bad news to a client. And Amanda, my sweet Amanda, would not even look at me. Sophia cleared her throat. We think the best solution would be for you to sell that old house and move into Sunny Pines Retirement Village. Thomas has researched it thoroughly. They have excellent care options as you age. We would cover any costs the sale of your house would not, Thomas added as if offering a generous business deal. In return, we think it would be best if contact was limited. Holiday cards, perhaps. Maybe a phone call on your birthday. You want me to disappear? I said, the full reality finally sinking in. You are ashamed of me. Not ashamed, James corrected quickly. We simply recognize that our lives have diverged to the point where regular interaction is no longer beneficial to any of us. And the grandchildren? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. They barely know you as it is, Thomas pointed out. It will be an easy transition. I sat in stunned silence, looking at the faces of the children. I had raised the family I had sacrificed everything for. In this moment, they were strangers to me. Well-dressed, articulate strangers who had calculated my worth and found me lacking. Did you all vote on this? I finally asked, my voice small in the large dining room. Thomas nodded. It was unanimous. I looked at Amanda, who finally raised her eyes to meet mine. There were tears there, but she did not contradict her brother. Unanimous. The word echoed in my mind like a death knell. My own children had sat around this table, perhaps in these very chairs, and decided I was no longer worthy of being part of their lives. The humiliation burned through me, followed by a wave of grief so profound I thought it might stop my heart. I had lost Martha 5 years ago, and now in this perfect house on Christmas Day I had lost my children too. I sat motionless at the table, feeling as if the elegant room around me had suddenly become a vacuum, drawing all the air from my lungs. Time seemed to slow down each second, stretching into painful clarity. I could hear the faint sounds of my grandchildren laughing downstairs, oblivious to the fact that their parents were excommunicating their grandfather from their levees. As I looked around the table, memories flooded through me unbidden. I saw Thomas at 7 sitting on my shoulders at a baseball game, cheering so loudly I thought I might go deaf. James at 12 calling me at work in tears because he had failed a math test, and how I had left my job site early to sit with him at the kitchen table working through problems until he understood. Amanda as a teenager, devastated by her first heartbreak, falling asleep against my shoulder after crying for hours. I remembered the 36-hour shifts I had worked when Thomas needed braces that our insurance would not cover. The second mortgage we had taken out to pay for James's first year of law school when his scholarship fell through. The countless nights Martha and I had sat at our kitchen table calculating and recalculating our budget to make sure our children could have the opportunities we never had. My eyes traveled around the dining room, taking in the expensive furnishings, the original artwork on the walls, the crystal chandelier that probably cost more than I made in a year as a construction worker. This life of luxury that my children now enjoyed, I had helped build its foundation with calloused hands and a breaking back. I thought of Thomas's graduation from business school. Martha and I had sat in the audience, bursting with pride, watching our son receive his diploma in his crisp new suit, a suit we had scraped together the money to buy because we knew appearances mattered in the financial world he was entering. I remembered how he had barely acknowledged us at the reception afterward, too busy introducing himself to potential employers and the parents of his wealthier classmates. Something shifted inside me as I sat there. The shock and humiliation began to give way to something else, a quiet, steady clarity. These adults sitting around me were no longer the children I had raised. Somewhere along the way, they had become people I did not recognize, people who could coldly calculate the value of family and find their own father wanting. Without saying a word, I stood up and walked to the living room where I had left my gifts. I gathered them in my arms and returned to the dining room. One by one, I placed a gift in front of each person's place at the table. The science kits for the twins, the journal for Emma, the baseball card for Jacob, the books for Lily. When I reached Thomas, I set down the small box containing my grandfather's pocket watch. Then I reached into my inside jacket pocket and removed a worn envelope. "Open it," I said quietly, my first words since their pronouncement. Thomas raised an eyebrow, but did as instructed. Inside were a stack of yellowed receipts and canceled checks, the records of tuition payments to his prestigious undergraduate university and business school. "Keep looking," I said. Beneath the school payments was a faded photograph of a much younger me standing proudly next to the framework of a house under construction. I was covered in sawdust, smiling broadly at the camera. "Do you know where that is?" I asked. Thomas stared at the photo, confusion evident on his face. "That is the Westfield Bank headquarters downtown," I explained. "I was part of the crew that built it. I worked overtime on that project for 6 months, coming home long after you kids were in bed, so that we could afford your first semester at Princeton." I turned to James next, pulling out another envelope from my pocket. "Your law school tuition," I said, simply placing it before him. "Every payment. Your mother took an extra hospital shift every weekend for 3 years to make those happen." Finally, I reached into my bag and withdrew a small bank book. I set it on the table between all 3 children. "This is a savings account. Martha and I started the day Thomas was born. We put a little money in it every month without fail, even during the lean years when we could barely pay the mortgage. It was meant for your children's college funds. There is enough there for all 5 grandchildren to attend any university they choose." A stunned silence fell over the table. Thomas stared at the bank book, then at the old receipts. "But there is something else you should know." I continued, my voice finding its strength. "Something that might change your unanimous vote." I reached into my jacket once more and pulled out a folded document. I smoothed it on the table, turned it around, and pushed it toward Thomas. "What is this?" he asked, voice suddenly uncertain. "The deed to this house," I replied calmly. Thomas snatched up the document, his confident facade cracking for the first time. "What are you talking about?" "This is my house. Sophia and I bought it 4 years ago." "You lease it," I corrected gently. "From Cornerstone Investments, a company I established 20 years ago with some fellow construction workers who wanted to pool our resources and invest in real estate." The color drained from Thomas's face as he scanned the document. "This cannot be right. Martha and I lived simply, but we were not poor," I explained, my voice steady now. "We saved. We invested carefully. While you saw an old man in an outdated house with outdated values, you failed to see what was in front of you. I do not believe this, Thomas stammered, passing the document to James, whose legal training immediately kicked in as he scrutinized the paperwork. It is legitimate, James confirmed after a moment, his voice hollow. You own our house, Sophia asked, her perfectly composed appearance now disturbed by genuine shock. Cornerstone owns several properties in this neighborhood, I continued. Your broker approached us when this house came on the market. I recognized the address immediately and arranged a favorable lease agreement for you through our management company. I never told you because I wanted you to feel independent, to build your own life without feeling like you owed me anything. I turned to face James. You're building downtown the high-rise where your law firm rents the top 3 floors. Cornerstone is a minority investor in that development too. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the distant sounds of the children playing seemed to have faded away. So you see, I continued, I may not fit into your social circles. I may wear unfashionable clothes and drive an old car and talk too much about your mother. But I built more than you know. Not just houses and buildings, but a foundation for all of you. Thomas had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Dad, if we had known... I held up my hand. This changes nothing about who I am. I am still the same father who embarrasses you in front of your colleagues. I still volunteer with the homeless. I still live in the house where you grew up. If those things made me unworthy of being in your family 5 minutes ago, they still do now. I looked each of them in the eye, but I want you to understand what you are really voting on. Amanda finally broke her silence. Dad, I never wanted this. I tried to tell them it was wrong. But you voted yes, I said softly. Actions matter more than intentions, Amanda. That was something your mother and I always tried to teach you. I stood up straight, feeling a strength I had not felt in years. I am not going to evict you, Thomas. This house will be transferred to your name as a gift. Relief flooded his face, but I was not finished. With one condition. What condition? He asked warily. For 1 year, you and your family will volunteer every Saturday morning at the Riverside homeless shelter where I work. No excuses, no sending money, instead no delegating to assistants. You, Sophia, and the children. Every Saturday serving meals, sorting donations, and talking to the people there. That is unreasonable, Sophia protested. We have social commitments, the children have activities. It is entirely reasonable, I countered. 1 morning a week to secure a $3 million home free and clear. Any real estate agent would call that the deal of a lifetime. I turned to James. You and your family will join them. Consider it pro bono work for your law firm. James nodded slowly, still processing everything he had learned. And Amanda, I said, softening my tone slightly. I know your heart was torn, but standing by while injustice happens is its own kind of wrong. You and David and Lily will help me organize a fundraiser for the shelter, something that puts your teaching skills and David's design talents to good use. Amanda stood up suddenly, tears streaming down her face. Dad, I am so sorry. I was a coward. I should have said something, should have defended you. Yes, you should have, I agreed. But regret is useless without change. Show me with actions, not words. Thomas was staring at the deed, his ambitious mind no doubt already calculating how to turn this situation to his advantage. And after the year, what then? Then the house is yours, free and clear, I replied. And you can vote again about whether you want me in your family. But this time you will be voting with full information and hopefully with a better understanding of what family actually means. James looked up from the documents. You could have told us about Cornerstone years ago. Why keep it a secret? I smiled sadly. Because I wanted you to love me for being your father, not for being your landlord. For the first time in years, I saw my 3 children truly look at me, not as an embarrassing relic or an obligation, but as a person with depth and dignity they had failed to recognize. In the silence that followed, I heard the sound of small footsteps on the stairs. The grandchildren were coming back up, likely in search of dessert. In that moment, I made another decision. I will stay for dessert, I announced. For the children's sake, we will act as if this conversation never happened. I will not ruin their Christmas with adult problems. And then I will leave, and you all have 1 week to decide if you accept my terms. As the children burst into the dining room with the energy only youth can bring, I saw my own children exchange glances, silently communicating in that way siblings do. They knew I had outmaneuvered them, but more importantly, I had shown them something about character they had forgotten. I served Martha's cranberry bread pudding to my grandchildren, watching their faces light up as they tasted their grandmother's recipe for the first time. In their innocent enjoyment, I saw glimmers of the children I had raised, before ambition and materialism had hardened them. Perhaps there was still hope for this family after all. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home preparing for another Christmas dinner. It was not a mansion like Thomas's house, but it was newer and more comfortable than my old place. A bright open-plan home in a pleasant neighborhood with a small garden out back, where I had planted some of Martha's favorite flowers. I had sold our old house 6 months earlier. Not because my children pressured me to, but because I was ready for a change. Moving had been both painful and liberating. I had finally packed away most of Martha's things, keeping only the most meaningful items. Her favorite books now sat on my new bookshelf. Her wedding ring hung on a chain around my neck, close to my heart, but no longer ruling it. The doorbell rang promptly at 5 o'clock. Thomas and his family were always punctual. I opened the door to find them standing there looking different than they had a year before. Thomas's designer suit had been replaced by a simple sweater and slacks. Sophia's diamond jewelry was noticeably more understated. The children stood close to their parents, smiling shyly, rather than staring at their phones. "Merry Christmas, Dad," Thomas said, embracing me with genuine warmth. As they entered, James and his family pulled into the driveway. James looked more relaxed than I had seen him in years. Patricia carried a homemade dish rather than store-bought offerings. The twins raced up to greet me with hugs rather than the awkward nods of strangers. Amanda and her family were the last to arrive, bringing a handmade wreath for my front door. Lily immediately took my hand. "Grandpa, can I help set the table like you taught me at the shelter?" My home filled quickly with the sounds I had missed for so many years. Children laughing, adults talking, the comfortable noise of family. As I watched them interact, I marveled at the changes a year had wrought. Thomas had begun his shelter service reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable around the homeless residents. But sometime around month 3, something changed. He had come face to face with a former investment banker who had lost everything during the financial crisis. The man's story had shaken Thomas deeply, making him realize how fragile success could be. By month 6, he had started offering financial literacy workshops at the shelter, teaching residents how to budget and rebuild credit. Sophia, surprisingly, had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. After initially complaining about the smell and depressing atmosphere of the shelter, she had formed an unexpected bond with an elderly woman who had once been an art teacher before mental illness and bad luck had left her homeless. Sophia now led art therapy sessions every other Sunday, in addition to the required Saturday mornings. James had taken his assignment a step further. 6 months into our agreement, he had left his corporate law firm to work for a nonprofit, providing legal aid to low-income families. The pay cut was substantial, but as he told me over coffee one day, For the first time, I feel like my work matters beyond the billable hours. Amanda had flourished in her role organizing the shelter fundraiser. Her natural teaching abilities and compassion had made her a favorite among both volunteers and residents. David had redesigned the shelter's common areas, transforming the institutional space into something that felt more like a community center. They had raised over $200,000 at their first event, enough to expand the shelter's job training program. As we gathered around my dining table, I looked at the faces of my family. Truly my family again. The grandchildren no longer looked at me with confusion or disinterest. Jacob had spent several weekends helping me set up my new workshop in the garage. Emma had asked me to teach her how to make Martha's cranberry bread pudding. The twins regularly FaceTimed me to share their science projects. Lily had a special chair at my house that she declared was just for visits with Grandpa. "Before we eat," Thomas said, standing up at the table, "I want to say something." A year ago, those words had preceded the most painful moment of my life since Martha's death. Today, I felt no fear as my son looked around the table. "A year ago, I made the worst mistake of my life," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "I tried to cut my father out of our family because I was too blind to see what really matters." He looked at me directly. "Dad, this year has changed me, changed all of us. You could have taken everything from me, my home, my pride, my sense of security. Instead, you gave me the chance to find my humanity again. I will never be able to repay that gift." James raised his glass. "To Dad, who taught us twice how to be a family. Once when we were children, and again when we were too foolish to remember the lessons." Amanda wiped tears from her eyes. "And to Mom, who would be so proud of what you did." As dinner progressed, I shared stories about Martha that I had kept bottled up for years. Not just the sad ones about her illness, but the joyful ones about our life together. For the first time, I could speak of her without feeling that crushing grief, and my children listened without discomfort. During dessert, Thomas cleared his throat again. "Dad, we took another vote." My heart skipped a beat, but his smile reassured me. "It was unanimous," he continued. "We want you to know that you are not just part of this family. You are its foundation, its heart. And we are all deeply grateful that you gave us a second chance we did not deserve." Later that evening, as the grandchildren played a board game on the living room floor and the adults chatted in the kitchen, I slipped away for a moment to the back porch. Looking up at the stars, I felt Martha's presence more strongly than I had in years. "You were right, old girl," I whispered to the night sky. "Love is patient even when it is painful, and family is not what you are born into, but what you nurture every day with honesty and respect." This past year had taught me so much about healing. Working at the shelter had given me purpose beyond my grief. I had made new friends, not just acquaintances, but true friends who valued me for exactly who I was. I had learned that while the pain of loss never completely disappears, it can transform into something that strengthens rather than weakens. I had also learned that true dignity comes not from material success or social status, but from standing firmly in your truth even when it would be easier to bend. I had shown my children that lesson through actions, not words, and finally they had understood. "Grandpa," Lily's small voice called from the doorway, "we are all waiting for you to tell us a Christmas story. Mom says you tell the best ones." I smiled and took her small hand in mine. "I would be honored to, sweetheart." As I rejoined my family, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift we can give to those we love is the chance to rediscover what matters. Sometimes the deepest healing comes only after the most painful truths have been faced. And sometimes, just when you think your story is ending, you discover it is actually beginning a whole new chapter. Looking back on that Christmas a year ago, I realize now what a blessing in disguise it truly was. That painful moment, when my son announced I was no longer family, forced all of us to confront hard truths we had been avoiding for years. It stripped away pretenses and showed us who we really were, and gave us the chance to become better. I do not share this story to shame my children. They have more than redeemed themselves through their actions this past year. I share it because I believe many of you watching might recognize parts of your own family story in mine. Perhaps you too have felt undervalued, pushed aside, or forgotten by those who should cherish you most. Perhaps you too have wondered if the sacrifices you made were worth it. What I learned through this journey is that true strength is not found in wealth or status, or even in being right. True strength comes from knowing your own worth and standing firm in that knowledge even when others fail to see it. It comes from being willing to offer second chances without becoming a doormat. It comes from understanding that sometimes people need to lose something before they can appreciate its value. I also learned that it is never too late to build a new life. At 62, I thought my best days were behind me. I believed my role was simply to fade into the background of my children's lives, a relic of their past they occasionally had to deal with. Now at 63, I have discovered that life still holds possibilities I never imagined. My volunteer work at the shelter has expanded into a part-time paid position, coordinating their mentorship program. I have started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but a lovely friendship with a kind widow named Grace who volunteers at the community garden. I have taken up woodworking again, creating pieces that connect me to the craftsmanship I loved during my construction days. Thomas and Sophia have sold their mansion and moved to a more modest home using the difference to establish a foundation that provides housing assistance to families in crisis. James's work with the Legal Aid Society has given him a sense of purpose his corporate job never did. Amanda has organized a program matching shelter residents with schools for speaking engagements, helping students understand the complex realities of homelessness. My grandchildren now spend regular time with me. Just last month, Jacob asked me to teach him how to use power tools, something his father never learned. Emma writes me letters every week practicing her storytelling. The twins call me their science grandpa because I help them with experiments. And Lily has her own special corner in my workshop where she creates alongside me. So if you find yourself feeling cast aside, remember this. You have value that does not diminish with age. You have wisdom that cannot be measured in dollars. You have the power to stand in your truth with dignity. And sometimes that stance can transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family? What helped you find your dignity in difficult moments? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched you in some way, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel. Your support means the world to me and helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. Thank you for listening, and remember, family is not just about blood or name, but about respect, appreciation, and love demonstrated through actions. That is the truest legacy we can leave behind.